Right, we'll give it a couple more seconds here and then we'll get started.
Right.
Right, I'm seeing the numbers level off, so we'll go ahead and kind of get started here. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to NAFA New York's webinar today. I'm Zach Levin, and I serve as the chapter executive for the NAFA Florida chapter. I'm serving as co-host with Jennifer Maurer, the New York chapter executive, who unfortunately could not be here today due to a vacation, but she does send her regards. I'd like to make a special welcome to our NAFA members from Florida and New Jersey who are also joining today's critically important program. Today, we're going to be discussing the cybersecurity regulations of the New York State Department of Financial Services. They have released a guidebook that illustrates how independent agents can ensure they are compliant with these new regulations. This guidebook was emailed to you on Thursday, July 17th, but if you didn't receive it, just use the chat to let me know and I can get a copy to you. And please check out the NAFA New York website events page to register for our state conference that's being held on September 10th at the Marriott Melville on Long Island. To kind of turn it over to our featured speaker today, that is Laura. No, I'm so sorry. I'm just not going to get your last name right, but Evan.
Eileen.
She is our legislative representative for NAFA New York. She currently works for Greenberg Trog and focuses her practice on insurance regulatory matters. But starting in September, she will move to a new position as Director of Regulatory Affairs for the Life Insurance Council of NYS. Laura previously served as Executive Deputy and Superintendent at the New York State Department of Financial Services, where she led the department's insurance division, which regulates approximately 1,700 insurers with assets exceeding $4 trillion. In her role at the DFS, Laura supervised all substantive insurance matters, including financial solvency examinations, market conduct examinations, and insurance company acquisitions. She worked on policy initiatives, including formulation of regulations and industry guidance. Laura also served as a liaison to regulated entities, trade associations, and consumer groups on emerging issues and coordinated departments' involvement with the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. So as we welcome Laura, I'd remind if you have any questions that you have throughout this webinar, please put them in the Q&A tab in the Zoom, and we will get to them at certain points throughout the webinar. So without any further ado, Laura, I will give it to you to take it away.
Terrific. Well, thank you. Happy Monday, everybody. I just wanted to also introduce my colleague, Eileen Hayes, who joins us also from Greenberg Traurig. Eileen has been at the department, had been at the Department of Financial Services for over 20 years as an attorney and is well acquainted with all things DFS. So Greenberg Traurig has been really honored over the last few years to work with NAFA New York, and we're honored to be here today to join you. Just to give you a little bit of background of how we got to where we are today, some of you may have joined a webinar that NAFA New York did with the Department of Financial Services Cyber Division some months back, where they talked about compliance with Part 500. They focused, very broadly. So they also focused on larger companies, Class A companies, which are the largest companies under the regulation. And it may have been a little too high level or too much information for those of you who have small businesses. And, in the chat during that webinar and questions that NAFA sent to the department afterwards, I think that the department realized that small businesses are really looking for a way to comply with Part 500 and wanted some more very particular guidance. And in response to that, they did put together a template, which I understand from Zach, that has been distributed to you. So I think today what we're going to do is we're going to focus on small businesses that have a limited exemption, which means that you would have to still comply with portions of the cybersecurity reg. And we're going to go through a couple of things, and then we're going to get to that template at the end and help you walk through that a little bit. I know that NAFA Florida and New Jersey has joined us. Welcome. I do think it's important because the Part 500 applies to out-of-state residents the same as in-state residents. There's actually no distinction between the two. So it would be good for you to also understand if you're working in New York, you're licensed with a non-resident license, how that you can comply with Part 500. So hopefully at the end, you'll feel a little bit more confident of what you need to do to comply with Part 500. Next slide, please, Zach. Okay, so today we're going to walk you through the DFS tools to assist you in answering 3 questions. The first one is, do I have an exemption for Part 500? And Eileen is going to walk you through some of the tools that DFS have for you to figure out that really baseline question. If you don't have an exemption, this is probably not the webinar for you, but the department has a couple of seminars linked on their page, videos that you could watch to see what you have to do to comply with the entire reg. And the interesting thing here is that, you know, not all companies have the exemption, and then not all the exemptions are the same. So today, as I said, we're going to focus on what it means having a limited exemption. And this is a little tricky because you have parts of the cyber reg that you're exempt from and parts that you have to comply with. And then lastly, we're going to get to how does an entity with that limited exemption comply with Part 500. And this is the template that Zach mentioned has been sent to you, and we're going to walk you through that at the end. So now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Eileen, who's going to walk you through some of the DFS tools to help you determine if you have an exemption. Eileen?
Thank you, Laura. We have the next slide. So this slide addresses the regulation, the entire regulation applicable to banks, insurance companies, and you guys. So there is a link there if you want to look through and take a look at the reg. But, you know, the reg is fundamentally to try and put an infrastructure in place and to encourage, you know, regulated entities to have, you know, the proper protections in place to address cyber security threats. And as Laura already mentioned, it applies to any person who is operating under or required to operate under a license, registration, a charter, certificate, permit, accreditation under the banking law, the insurance law, or the financial services law. So as Laura mentioned, this is very broadly drafted. It catches the largest insurance company, and, you know, it has some implications for even the smallest producer or you know, independent adjuster, or, you know, essentially everything that's licensed or registered. And, you know, importantly, even if you are licensed in New York and do fairly little business in New York, you know, because you are a non-resident, it does have implications for you. And we could go to the next slide. So the first thing we're going to do is run through, you know, how you determine if you're exempt or eligible for a limited exemption under the regulations. You know, with either of these things, there's still something that you need to do. Even if you qualify for the total exemption, you still need to take some action. Next slide. So, you know, the first section in red there addresses the limited exemption, and we're going to spend, you know, quite a bit more time on that, because a lot of, most commonly, that's where a producer would fit. But before we go through the regulatory language that's set forth there in red, I'm going to run you through the total exemptions, you know, the folks that can essentially indicate to the department that I meet the exemption requirements in total. So, you know, the first one is set forth in B there, the first paragraph in black. And it's if you're an employee, agent, wholly owned subsidiary, representative, or designee of a covered entity who has its own cybersecurity program, which covers you as an entity. So if you're an employee of an insurance company subject to their cybersecurity program, you would be exempt on that basis because the insurance company's cybersecurity program covers you. Same for a wholly owned subsidiary or a representative or agent that's only doing work for an entity whose program covers them, so that's a very narrow exception. C, indicates, if you're essentially not engaging in using an information system or controlling directly or indirectly accessing any non-public information. So you must both, not have any electronic systems in place and not have any access to information that wouldn't be public, either, a business purpose or for somebody's personal identifying information, either of those things, anything that would not otherwise be public and no electronic systems. So, you can see from that it'd be pretty rare that any kind of covered entity would meet that exception. Would you mind flipping to the next page? We're going to come back to that one, Zach, to look at the red. The next one is for captive insurance companies. I don't think very many producers would fit within that, so that's a captive, acting within its own system. So retirees pop up next in E here, and Laura's been so kind to underline this for us. So this is an individual insurance broker, who is exempt because, essentially they haven't accepted any compensation or anything of value, placed any risks on behalf of another person for at least a year. So you have to be inactive for a year and retired, although licensed. F here is just as I mentioned, even if you meet that retiree requirement, you do still have something to do. Within 30 days of making that determination that you meet the exemption, the full exemption, you need to file a notice of exemption with the department. It's a very simple form. You send it in, and I believe you send it in once. So as long as your circumstances don't change, that would be what you would need to do if you met one of these exemptions. Would you mind flipping backwards, Zach, to get to the meat of this, which is nicely highlighted in red. I'm going to run through this, which is set forth in the regulatory language here, but the tools really are very helpful for this, and I think they make it much clearer. So a limited exemption is available to a covered entity that meets one of the following 3 criteria. So this is an or, you only need to meet one of them. The first one is that you have fewer than 20 employees and independent contractors, so you need to count them. So the covered entity has fewer than 20 when combined with the independent contractors, but you also need to count the employees of the affiliates and the independent contractors. So, if you are, connected to an affiliate and they have a large number of employees, even though you may only have 2 within your agency, you wouldn't meet this requirement. The affiliates and the independent contractors count. But you may meet the next requirement, and that's less than $7.5 million in gross annual revenue in cash in each of the last 3 years. So you have to be able to repeat this over the past 3 years from all business operations of the covered entity. And then when you look at affiliates, it's their business operations within the state of New York. So you count all of your business operations, and if you have affiliates, the business operations in the state of New York. The third one, which is also an alternative, is structured a little differently, and it's less than 15 million in year-end total assets. You include the assets of all affiliates, right? And in this instance, they don't limit it to assets of the component of the affiliate that sits within New York. It's all assets. So the total of all assets of the producer and the affiliates needs to fall below 15 million. So that's just a run through of the regs, but we're gonna turn to the tools that'll make this a bit easier to look at, and they actually get at a couple of things that, you know, aren't apparent from just looking at the reg. So here, you know, there's a home page for DFS that we're sharing so that you have it. And then, you know, the next link down is the Cybersecurity Resource Center, and it really has a great deal of information. The regulation does quite a lot. You know, there's training materials and helpful tools there, you know, but there's also tools that are focused on a Class A entity, you know, so much bigger insurer. So we're going to try and show you the ones that that are most appropriate for producers. If you could jump to the next page, Zach. So when you go to that Cybersecurity Resource Center, you know, you'll see a listing of training and compliance resources. And Zach has his tool on what I find to be one of the best ones. And it says, am I exempt from the cybersecurity reg? So this takes you through whether you're exempt, you know, entirely because you're retired, or want to meet one of the other criteria. And then in the middle, you know, it'll test to see if you have a limited exemption. And then, you know, worst case scenario, you get to the tiny no in the corner. But, you know, if you just starting with the upper left-hand corner, it says, is the covered entity an employee, agent, wholly owned subsidiary, representative, or designee of another DFS regulated business whose cybersecurity program covers the entity? If yes, you know, we talked about that. That's like one of the criteria for a total exemption. You get to follow the line all the way to the bottom and you qualify for a full exemption. You can file, you know, a notice of exemption with the department and be done with it as long as your circumstances don't change. The next one, and I find this to be more helpful than just looking at, oops, I'm sorry, I was just going to look at the, can we put it back up, Zach? Thanks. So I was going to just show one or two more, but you know, the next one over, you know, it includes more detail than you really see from just looking at the reg, because, or the exemptions in the reg, because of how everything works together. But, you know, it says, is the covered entity an inactive individual insurance broker? So, you know, we didn't see this one in the exemptions because the reg didn't apply. So there was no reason to put it in the exemptions. But if you're an inactive insurance broker, right, you're not currently licensed, you don't have an active license. You know, so it asks, is the covered entity an inactive insurance broker that does not otherwise qualify as a covered entity, that does not maintain, control, use indirectly or directly any information systems, does not have any public information, does not have anything of value, or acted in a manner soliciting, negotiating, selling policies or contracts. So it's just a little bit more detail. If you can run through and answer all those questions, yes, you know, it'll indicate that you're exempt. If not, it'll take you to no. So jumping down, you'll see, all right, the first three questions are to determine if you qualify for the full exception. The next three are to determine, or four are to determine if you qualify for the limited exception, which is running through whether you have 20 employees or less when you count the independent contractors, when you count the affiliates. It'll run you through each of those questions, and you can go through the flow chart and see if you qualify for either a full or a limited exemption. So I think that it's a very helpful tool. It takes a moment, you got to go through it slowly, but I think everything's there and it'll get you to the right result. As Laura is going to get to later, a limited exemption still leaves you with something to do, and she's going to help with that. You know, but it should show you which box you fall into: fully exempt, limited exemption, or you have the full reg to comply with. Okay, maybe go forward in the PowerPoint by one slide. Whoops, 2 slides, because we just did this. Okay, there is another exemption tool. And this one really just speaks to the limited exemption. So you're sitting here, you're not retired, you don't work, for an insurance company that covers you with their cybersecurity. None of that resonated with you. This is a different tool that, all you're trying to figure out is whether or not you meet the limited exemption. And this walks you through, and you can enter an answer to each of the questions on it: the number of the entity's employees, the number of independent contractors, the number of affiliate employees. It'll total it up and it'll say you qualify or don't qualify. Would you click that link? I'm hoping this one works too, Zach. Otherwise, we have to go back 2 pages. Okay, so it's nice, you plug in your numbers, whatever they are, number of employees, independent contractors. And then, the middle section here takes you through, what's your gross annual revenue from all businesses, your gross annual business revenue from operations in New York State. Then the third grouping of boxes speaks to the criteria related to assets, including the assets of all affiliates. So you plug this in, and maybe you meet it because you have the right number of employees in the first box, or maybe you meet it because your assets fall below the 15 million when you consider the affiliates. But at the end of completing this, it'll tell you if you qualify for the limited exemption. So if your head hurts and you don't like the visuals like that flow chart, which that might be me, I don't know. This is a helpful tool, and probably worth doing after you run through the flow chart. So those 2 tools are pretty helpful in helping you determine, which category you fit into. I'll go to the next one. Okay, and I think I'm gonna turn everybody back over to Laura.
I think we may have had a question about whether financial professionals who are registered reps of a covered broker-dealer or a registered investment advisor would be exempt. I think, without getting into too many specifics, I would just encourage everybody who might think they're covered by another entity to confirm with that entity if they are regulated by the department and if they have filed a certificate of compliance. And if they have filed a certificate of compliance and you are fully covered by them, there is a very good chance that you would be fully exempt. But you would need to know that not only are they regulated by the department, they have filed a certificate of compliance, because if they haven't, you can't rely on somebody who's not in compliance. I think that was the only substantive question that I saw. I think there's some questions about sending out the template, which would be great. Everyone should have that. Plus, we're gonna show you that it's available on the department website in any case, so you would have access to that. Okay, so now, as we said, we're gonna focus on what does a limited exemption mean. And as I think we keep repeating, because I think it's really the biggest takeaway from today's seminar, is that a limited exemption does not give you a full pass on Part 500. It reduces your compliance obligations, but you still have sections of the regulation that you do need to comply with. In going through these resources that the department has made available to you, I do think that they have made it pretty easy to figure out what you do have to comply with and what you do not. Zach, you want to turn it to the next slide? So here's one of the first tools that the department has. I've seen it a couple of places on the Cybersecurity Resource Center. I did see, I saw it under FAQ 39, and it does it in chart form. So if you take a look at the left side, which is labeled exemptions, these are the sections that if you have a limited exemption, you do not need to comply with. So if you're feeling like you still have a lot to comply with, and you want to feel better, take a look at what you don't have to comply with. You see at the top 500.4 cybersecurity governance. That has to do with the board. If you have a board of directors, what their role has to be with your cybersecurity program. You do not have to comply with that. The next couple, vulnerability management, audit trail, application security. I think those are more technical or sophisticated requirements that you do not have to comply with. Encryption is down at the end, and an incident response and business plan. Again, those things are exempt and are for only larger companies. The side that you're going to look at is the compliance requirements. On the right-hand side, you'll see that I've put in red a couple of dates, and that is because the Part 500 was amended a couple of months ago, and some of the requirements that now apply for people with limited exemptions sort of have a rollout, and so they're giving you a little bit of time to get in compliance with them. So if you just kind of run through it, and we're going to dig into each of these more, but you do need to have a cybersecurity program and policy. We're going to show you how the department has made it easy for you to get that. You have to have access privileges and management. You have to know who's logging on and why. You have to do a risk assessment. DFS has made that easy. We're going to walk you through that. Third-party service provider security policy. You do have to know, you have to do some due diligence on folks that might be accessing your system. And we're going to show you that. Multi-factor authentication. I think this is really the big one, right? So you have a couple months, but not a lot of time, to November 1st, 2024, to have multi-factor authentication. It is limited for limited exemption companies. It's for remote access into your system, and that includes the cloud. We'll show you some of that. But that's a big one. And that's really one of the very few things that DFS has said you must have as far as security. And previously, the reg did not have any very specific things. They feel that multi-factor authentication is so critical and so easy at this point that they are requiring not just larger companies, but smaller businesses with a limited exemption, that they want them to have it, at least for the remote access. For the larger companies, you have to have it every time you access your system, whether you're remote or not. Some data retention requirements. You have about a year to do that. Cybersecurity training, awareness training, not as much time. That's the same as multi-factor. You have to do that in a couple of months. And then, of course, notices to the superintendent if you have a breach or a ransomware attack. So this gives you a very nice, I think, list of, you don't have to go through the exemption, through Part 500 yourself. You can look at this list and you know exactly what you need to be in compliance with. So, you know, I guess we would say, if you thought you were off the hook, this shows you do have quite a bit to comply with, but we're going to get there. So I don't think it's as daunting as it might seem to you. Next slide, please. The other tool, which is under the cybersecurity resource that DFS gives you, is a checklist for limited exemptions. So, you know, you have it in that quick chart. This has a little bit more meat to it, and you can walk through each of these things to make sure that you're doing everything that is required. DFS has broken it down on this checklist of what has to be done annually and what has to be done on an ongoing basis. So let's turn to this a little bit and walk through just some of the highlights. And, you know, before you start to panic that this seems like a lot of information, at the end, we're going to get to the template, and DFS has made it quite easy for you to have a roadmap to get into compliance. The first thing on the checklist as an annual requirement is to file a cybersecurity compliance form. In a sense, this is really starting at the end result, right? Because we want to go through all of everything to make sure that you're in compliance so that you would be able to file this certificate of compliance. This is sort of what your goal is to be able to look through all of your policies and procedures, go through your checklist, go through what you need to comply with Part 500, and you would either submit a written certification of compliance saying that you've materially complied with the requirements of Part 500 the prior calendar year. And again, that's only the portions that you are required to comply with. Or if you are not yet in compliance, you would file a written acknowledgement of non-compliance, acknowledging that you did not materially comply, identify the sections that you still need to work on, and then you need to provide a remediation timeline of when you're going to be in compliance. So that acknowledgement of non-compliance is a new provision this year. Previously you had to certify you were 100% in compliance or not submit one. This gives companies an opportunity to say, hey, I'm almost there. I need to do XYZ. Perhaps it's the multi-factor authentication, and I'm going to have that installed by this date. I did want to just touch on, because the folks from Florida and New Jersey who have non-resident, I just wanted to say that again, this is all the same for you. So you're going to have to also submit the same certifications to the department as a resident, no distinction there. So, and again, I wanted to highlight, because I think this is something that we get a lot of questions about, and I think that the department has struggled with. Companies with limited exemptions have to file a notice of exemption. They also have to file the written certification of compliance. So if you have a limited exemption, on April 15th, you're going to be filing two things. You're going to be filing the fact that you have the limited exemption, and then hopefully if you're in compliance, you will file a written certification of compliance for those provisions that you need to comply with your limited exemption. So filing, and I think a lot of companies I've heard file only the notice of exemption and think they're done. That's not true. You're going to have to also file the certificate of compliance. I think that's really key, because DFS does track that. And if they see you have a limited exemption and you haven't filed your certification of compliance by April 15th, you will be getting a notice from the department, and they will follow up of why you haven't submitted it. It may look like you're not in compliance, and so we would encourage you to file that. I think next slide, please. Okay, so the checklist is continued. And this is really tracking those two columns that we saw on sort of the quick list of exempt or compliance. You do have to review and approve your written cybersecurity policies. You need to do that annually, and the same with your risk assessment. Both of those things are covered in the template that we're going to address in a bit. Cybersecurity awareness training. Again, you have a little bit of time till November, but not much. You're going to have to provide that to all staff in your office. Review and manage user access privileges. That's starting in 2025. That's covered by the template, and we will cover that in a bit as well. Next slide, Zach. Okay, now these are additional and ongoing requirements that you should sort of be doing all the time, not annually. The first one is the third-party provider assessments. So if you are using third-party vendors and they have access to your systems, you're going to have to do some due diligence on them, and we're going to show you how to do that. If you have a cybersecurity incident or you have an extortion payment, that does require reporting to the department. That should, you'll need to look at the regulation. I think those are within 72 hours of happening, so you will have to report that to the department. That's ongoing. Implementation of multi-factor authentication. Like I said, that's the November 1st deadline. That's a big date for you. And then develop and maintain up-to-date asset inventory. That again is starting in 2025, but you should be doing that throughout the year. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm gonna turn this over to Eileen, but I've put this slide in here because I get a lot of questions, and Eileen does too, from companies to say, okay, well, I had an exemption, but actually now I don't. And what do I do? And actually, the department does have a lot of guidance on that. So before we get into the next substantive section, I just wanted to take the opportunity for Eileen to walk you through if you had any changes to your partial exemption. Perhaps you retire and you now become fully exempt. We just wanted to make sure that you know that there are resources in the Cybersecurity Resource Center that can guide you through what you have to do. Eileen?
Right, and I mean, essentially, if there's a change, if you had determined you qualified for an exemption and now you feel you no longer do, you need to make a submission within 30 days of making your new determination. So if you no longer qualify, you make a submission, and the instructions are included in a link so you can see all the resources. And the other thing, that's important here is that although you should, contact the department and notify them that you're no longer exempt within 30 days of making that determination, you do have a bit of a grace period to come into full compliance or to limited, not limited compliance, but to full compliance as, so say you had a full exemption and now you have a limited exemption, you have 180 days to meet the requirements in that section. Similarly, if you had a limited exemption and you move to no longer having an exemption, perhaps you join with an affiliate who has, far too many resources and employees for you to meet any exemption, and you're jumping over into full compliance, then you have 180 days to meet that. I do think we received a question in the chat, and I did paste the definition of affiliate into the response, but someone a little bit earlier asked, who is an affiliate for the sake of this regulation? And I can read the definition to you. It means any person that controls, is controlled by, or is under common control with another person. So, control means the possession, direct or indirect, of the power to direct or cause the direction of the management and policies of a person through ownership of stock of such person or otherwise. So essentially it's a matter of who's under common control.
And I see a question at 1036, which I think Eileen just answered. The question is, so an independent producer who has broker contracts, would they still have a limited exemption? I'm assuming that if you have a contract with an insurance company, the insurance company is not an affiliate and does not have control. So I think you're right in assuming that because all the insurance companies would have more employees, no broker would have an exemption if we had to count them as an affiliate. Without delving into your relationship, I think that you would look at that definition that Eileen has just read, and it is in the regulation of affiliate. And I think it's likely if you have a contract with a third party, they're a third party vendor, not an affiliate. Without knowing more about the relationship, but I think that would probably be the case. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, so how do we get into compliance? I think that this is where we talked about in the beginning, that the department was very sensitive to the questions that NAIFA members had asked on their webinar that they did some months ago. And they created a template to help the smallest businesses with a limited exemption get into compliance. It is the first of its kind done by a regulator. And I think they're quite proud about it. And they're really hoping to get the message out to producers that they have invested a lot of time into this template, and hope that producers who are struggling or need to find ways to get it to compliance use this template and find it a valuable resource. So if you have no other program in place, I would really encourage you to take advantage of the template that we're going to go through now to develop your own cybersecurity program. So Zach, I think now it would be easier if I shared my screen. And I'm not so good at this, so I'm going to do my best. Okay. Okay, can everyone see my screen now? Okay.
Yes.
So this is, if you go to the department's website and you click on cybersecurity program template, this document will come up. And, you know, as you see here on the first page, it says that it's a resource to help individual licensees and individually owned businesses develop a cybersecurity program as required by Part 500, right? So this is for those of you who have a small business. And I'm going to just walk you through some of the highlights in the beginning, and then just show you how you can use this template to really develop your own cybersecurity program. So as you see, you could put your name and you could put the date on here, and you should, as you do this, you know, you should keep it and keep it in a safe place if ever called upon to show that you have a cybersecurity program and policy. So we'll scroll past, and I'm sorry if I'm making you dizzy, but we'll scroll past that and just take a look at the overview. And so, you know, I think that this is important. This template is provided by the New York State Department of Financial Services, DFS, as a tool to help individual licensees develop a cybersecurity program as required by the cybersecurity regulation. You know, I think there's a lot of references in the Part 500 to the requirement, and you saw it, to have a policy, a cybersecurity policy. And I wanted to confirm that if you take the time and you do this and you abide by what is required, meaning MFA and other things, that if you keep this document, that this would constitute your actual cybersecurity policy. And I did receive back word from the department on Friday afternoon that yes, this, if you need to be in compliance, so you need to do the things that you need to do. But if you keep this and you fill it out, this will constitute your cybersecurity program, but it will also constitute your cybersecurity policy, your written policy that you're required to have. As you see here, it says this document does not need to be submitted to the department or other state agencies for approval, right? So you're not going to submit this to the department, but you're going to fill it out, you're going to abide by it, you're going to answer the questions, and then you're going to keep it. As you see here, as we've been talking about, who should use it? This template is intended for individual licensees who qualify for a limited exemption. So Eileen walked you through to find out if you have that limited exemption. We won't do that again here, but if you do have that limited exemption, this is the template. This is the template for you. Okay. Let's just scroll down to instructions. Okay. So again, you're going to find this under the Cybersecurity Resource Center, and you could print it out there, or some of you have asked Zach if you haven't received a copy. NAFA is happy to send you a copy of this. I wanted to point out number 2. It sounds a little silly, but it's worth pointing out. Set aside a few hours to review and complete this template. This is not going to take you 5 minutes. This is really comprehensive, and you do have to you do have to commit some time and resources to this to do it right and to do it well. And the reason I really do believe it's important, I have been thinking that, it's very easy for the department. They have really picked up enforcement of the cybersecurity reg. It's very easy for them to send out sort of desk audits or targeted exams to ask for you to provide your policies and procedures to make sure you're in compliance. They're doing that more and more. Haven't seen it a lot with small producers, but now that they are taking the time and the resources, committing the resources to get small producers up to speed and educated and giving them the tools to be in compliance, it will only be a matter of time before DFS takes the time to check to see if small producers have done this. So I really do think that you should take some time and really make sure you're in compliance. And obviously, those of you who are here today, I think that that's your goal. So, I would just finish it up and complete the template and make sure you have everything that you need to do to be in compliance with Part 500. Okay, number 3, after you complete the template, keep it in a safe place. That's because if the department comes back to you and asks if you're in compliance, you want to be able to show that you've done this and you're in compliance. So here's how it starts, and we're just going to run through a few of these things, but you can see that this is really, they ask you a question and you're checking all that applies. Who's managing your information? Who's managing your computer system? Is it you? Is it a third party? Who is responsible for maintaining the cybersecurity? You want to answer that. And then starting with number 2, now we're really kind of getting into the meat of it. And this will track those checklists that we saw earlier on what sections you have to comply with. So they have a section on each of the sections of Part 500 that you need to comply with, and they're really going to walk you through it. So I want to just show you on a few of them because how this template works. So here, let's start with asset inventory. It asks you a question. Do you have an inventory of your computer systems? And if not, complete the template provided in Appendix 2. So Appendix 2, and this is where I might make you dizzy, is on page 12. So let's go down to page 12. Here's Appendix 1 is some definitions, which is helpful, I think. But you would go to Appendix 2, and this shows what you need to do an asset inventory. So it says your written cybersecurity program is required to address your asset inventory. Okay. So what they do is they tell you what you have to, what's included in your information systems: servers, workstations, firewalls, routers, mobile phones, printers, copyware, software, and cloud providers. Don't forget that. And then they ask you to catalog it, and they give you a chart here. So I think really to get into compliance with the asset inventory, you would complete this chart that's found in Appendix 2. And then you've checked off, you've done that section of Part 500. So now I'll go back to page 5. Okay, so then there's a few more questions here. They say that it should be reviewed annually. And they ask you to say how often you do it and where do you keep this inventory in case of a disaster. The next one is the cybersecurity risk assessment. And this is a really key one, a key requirement that has been in the cybersecurity reg really from the beginning. And, very often you will hear that people talk about Part 500 being risk-based. Each company decides what's best for them. And that's why I said on the multi-factor authentication, it's unusual for DFS to prescribe exactly what you have to do, because they do rely a lot on this cybersecurity risk assessment that every company, it may be a different size, has different hardware or software, different personnel, and you really need to decide what is best for you. And you do that by doing a cybersecurity risk assessment. But again, here, I think that the department is really walking you through step by step how to do it. And so I think this tool is incredibly helpful. We'll just run through this a little bit. That you're going to identify the potential cybersecurity hazards that could negatively affect your ability to conduct business. So that's the goal of what you're doing here. It says here you need to do it as reasonably necessary, but at a minimum annually. And you might remember it was on that list of things to do annually. And so how do you do all this? Well, they have given you a risk assessment in Appendix 3. So you would go down to the Appendix 3, which is right after the asset inventory. And they tell you, here, when completed, this template will be the risk assessment for your business. So in other words, the completed template should help you identify the risk and the controls used to mitigate such risks, okay? So you're going to go through and they say here, what am I trying to protect? You're trying to protect non-public information. And they tell you what the risk here is. And then here are the controls, and you check the ones that you have. Some of them are required. So if you don't have them, just having this document does not mean that you're in compliance with the cyber reg. For instance, the cybersecurity awareness training, we saw that had the date of November 2024. So you're going to have to be able to check this box, right? Regularly update your software. That probably is something that the department would consider prudent for you to be doing. The multi-factor authentication, again, you have until November to do that. So you're going to have to be in a position to check this box, that you back up your data regularly, you use a firewall, you're developing a plan in case of a cybersecurity incident. And it goes on. It tells you, shredding the documents, signing up for updates. And if you kind of go through these and ask yourself these questions, and you make sure that if it was on the list of things you have to do and you have them and you check it off, you will have developed for yourself, you will have conducted the risk assessment that is required under Part 500. And so I think the department has done a good job. If you're a small business and you don't have a CISO and maybe you don't use a third party and it's just you and you have maybe a few computers and a phone, and they really are trying to show you exactly what you need to do. And at the end of the day, you will have conducted the risk assessment that you're required to do. Okay, so let's go back. I think you kind of get the gist here. So we did asset inventory, we did the risk assessment. I also just wanted to show you third-party service providers, because this also, they have given you an appendix to help you understand what you have to do due diligence for a third-party provider. So it says here, you are required to periodically assess the adequacy of cybersecurity practices of third-party service providers to ensure the security of your system and non-public information, okay? So you're going to answer the question, do you use any third-party service providers? And if you do, you're going to go down to Appendix 4. And Appendix 4 will walk you through how you can comply with the requirement to do due diligence on third-party service providers. And so you'll see here that they give you basically a little cheat sheet of what you need to confirm. You need to confirm that your third-party service provider uses multi-factor authentication, that they use encryption policies, that they will notify you of a cybersecurity incident, and that, you know, you've done an overall assessment that the third-party service provider is appropriate to provide the services to you. And they give you a chart here that you can fill out to say who your provider is, the level of risk, that you've done your due diligence, and how often you've done it. And so if you follow this, you will then comply with Part 500 requirements on third-party service providers. There's a few more sections. I know we're running a little out of time, but let's just scroll back up just to see what else. I think those are the only appendix, but the rest I think are just questions. Access privileges, which is one of the requirements. This gives you some guidance here. It doesn't have, you're just going to answer some questions. It doesn't have an appendix, so you'll go through those and that gives you some information. I would just say, let's see, on number 4, do you use any type of remote access? You know, you want to make sure if you have that remote access, then you see you're going to have multi-factor authentication. And again, that's here number 6, to use multi-factor authentication for all remote access to your information systems. That's going to be that requirement in November. And you can see that the department kind of harps on it a lot because it's really important to them. And I'll tell you, if you look at the enforcement actions of larger companies that have been cited for cybersecurity violations, I think almost all of them failed to install multi-factor authentication. So it's just a very easy way for the department to find a violation. Let's see, I just wanted to point out to you on number 9, on the information system, you know, you have to have a password requirement, and they do give you a link here to find more information on what your password policy should include. Data retention and disposal, again, that's question only. There is, you should answer these questions and that will form your policy. And then here is your cybersecurity awareness training. That's something that you have to have in place. They don't give you anything here. You just need to, if you know, you're going to need to do it by November. And so here you're just going to fill in those dates. And then lastly, I think there's the incident response plan that you do need to notify the department within 72 hours of an incident. And they have a couple of check boxes here. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second. So that is the template. And so, you know, I spent some time going through it. I know we went through it quickly. But it does really give you, I think, a very good roadmap. And at the end of the day, you will have your program, you will have your policy. It tells you exactly what you need to do to be in compliance. And so I think with the tools that we walk through, you know, to answer those 3 questions of, do I have an exemption? What do I need to comply with? And then the template at the end, you know, you really should be in good stead to know how to comply with Part 500. And I think we're exactly at the hour. I'm just looking at the chat. Well, I hope this question, if an agent determines they no longer desire to remain licensed in New York, how does that affect them? I hope that was not a result of today's seminar scaring you. I mean, if you're not licensed in New York, and you give up your non-resident license or your resident license, you know, you certainly, you would not need to comply with Part 500, but I would just caution you that you should find out if the states that you're in has adopted the NAIC model cybersecurity law or regulation, because you might have similar requirements. I will tell you that if you are in compliance with the New York regulation, you are in compliance with the model. When the model was adopted in 2016 or 2017, they did put in a note in the model saying that if you're in compliance with New York, you're in compliance with the model. So if you are in compliance with this and you're in a state that has adopted the model, you are in good stead that you're probably in compliance with both. Let me just see. If you missed your annual filing requirements due by April 15th, but we're in compliance, how do you correct that? I would encourage you to submit your notice of exemption and your certificate of compliance now, even if it's late. I think if you have a license, the question is if you are just collecting renewal commission, but you're not jittering any new business. I think the requirement is if you have a computer's information system and you have non-public information, you need to be, you don't have a full exemption. So you would need to look at it from that angle, not if you're collecting new business. Is multi-factor authentication required for a sole proprietor using only one's laptop? So right now, multi-factor authentication for those companies with limited exemptions are only required for remote access. So take a look at I don't know exactly what you're using, but that also includes, I believe, the cloud. So I think that if you are only using your own laptop and you're not accessing it remotely, maybe not, but I think it includes the cloud, and if you're accessing something there, you might need it. Is there a link for the template? Yes. Zach, I think it was on, well, it's certainly on the Cybersecurity Resource Center, but we have a link in this presentation as well. Do you have that page with all the links, Zach? Have you handed out this to everybody or? No? Okay, so the link to the template, I think the easiest way to get it is to get it on the DFS website under Cybersecurity Resource Center. Okay, I think that's it. We're about 5 minutes over. Well, this has been really terrific. Feel free to reach out to Zach or to Jennifer when she returns if you have any other questions, and we can see if we can answer them. It would be great to hear from those of you who do use the template to see if it was helpful to you. If there's any other way that could be helpful, we're happy to see if we could communicate that back to the department as they, if we could update them if you're using it to see how it could be tinkered. I think they've invested a lot of resources and they really do want this to work. So we'd be happy to hear from you. And I think that's all I have today. But Eileen and I are here. We work with NAFA New York on a regular basis, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you submit to Zach or to Jennifer and see how we could be helpful. Well, thank you. Happy Monday, and have a good day.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.